Robert Englund here, aka Freddy Krueger, and you're watching Life in Film.
This is the podcast that we ask our guests from in front and behind the camera, how did they get their foot in the door? What was the key to unlocking their success? What's their story?
Just meet me at my porch at midnight. Oh, and meanwhile, whatever you do, don't fall asleep.
This Halloween, our guest is finally getting his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. He's pushing 400 credits on IMDB and has a career that spans over 5 decades. But you'll probably know him best for the man in your dreams. The iconic Freddy Krueger from the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. We chat about finally getting his star, Wes Craven and the various versions of Freddy Krueger, and the movies that inspired him to become an actor. Our guest today is actor Robert Englund. Robert, first of all, congratulations. A star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, that is like the pinnacle of any actor's aspirations, I presume. How does it feel after all these years?
Well, I sort of recognize that my successful franchise, Nightmare on Elm Street, is a kind of cultural touchstone. And because of the way it was spaced out over the decades, 10 years worth of movies from 84 to 94, then a sort of 10-year pause. But in that 10-year pause before we did Freddy versus Jason, we also went from, theatrical release to VHS to DVD to ultra high def to flat screens to cable. So I sort of accidentally, and it's just a great happy accident of my career, I obtained 3 generations of fans. And along with that, there was this parallel world that I knew a little bit about as a child, and a fan myself of various things, whether it was Famous Monsters magazine or Revell authentic kits of Frankenstein and the Wolfman, or just, great famous World War II models of Spitfires, and English pocket battleships and American aircraft carriers. So I knew there was this attendant merchandising going along. And then somewhere after Freddy versus Jason, I began to attend Comic-Cons pretty regularly. And I saw this incredible fan base that had developed over those years. So the cultural aspect or import of Freddy Krueger has been kind of obvious to me. But on a very personal level, Elliot, I was a child attending movies like Walt Disney's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which of course won an Oscar for special effects. I think it was up against another little childhood favorite of mine called Them, with the giant ants, great black and white cinematography. But I can remember seeing Cinderella. I can remember going to see grown-up movies like Orpheus Descending by Tennessee Williams. I think it was retitled The Fugitive Kind with Marlon Brando and a very young Joanne Woodward, who was kind of punk rock, driving around in her beat-up Jaguar. And the scary performance in that movie of Victor Jory. And I remember going to a matinee. I had older friends in a theater group, and we went to a matinee of the original original gangster West Side Story, not the remake by Spielberg, but the original West Side Story. And because I had older friends, I often had access to friends that had cars and driver's licenses. Even though I was 13 or 14 years old, I was highly mobile for a young teenager. And we had gone on a double date to see West Side Story, and we were so transported by the projection, is just huge, a way of being projected, and the giant speakers playing the Leonard Bernstein score and the Sondheim, contribution, and never having, taken any of that in before. And I remember being so transported, my friends and I, we danced out of the theater. and into the surprising, blinding light of Hollywood Boulevard because we forgot we were in a matinee. We were in gritty New York, we were, you know, dancing bad boys and bad girls and into that sunlight and the dream kind of going away, but still extending to the forecourt of the Chinese theater with the hand imprints and the autographs in cement forever. And now I connect to all of that because I'm getting my star, forever. So I'm sort of always part now, permanently, of the cultural zeitgeist. And, in America right now, things are a little rough. And one of the things we do share and we do have in common is that sort of fabric of popular culture, whether it's Elvis Presley or Marlon Brando or East Coast rap music or West Coast rap music or early rock and roll or classic movies or the new blockbusters. We sort of have and variety television. I'm sure, I know you guys do because I've done some of the shows in the UK, Graham Norton and stuff, but they become, or Benny Hill or anything else, Monty Python, they become part of the fabric of the culture. Uh, uh, like your stars, like Tom Hardy or someone from the past, like Olivier. And we have that too, with Jimmy Stewart and Henry Fonda and people like that. And so to be included with all of that, I think Jane Fonda's actually getting a star this year
Yes.
on the Boulevard. And I think Prince is as well. And just to have my name said in the same sentence,
Mm.
with those two people. I can remember when I was a surfer walking on the beach in Malibu Colony,
Mm.
north of Malibu Point, and seeing Jane Fonda in a bikini top and tight white Levi's, skin tight white stovepipe Levi's, the first skinny jeans. Oh, be still my heart, I think she was with Roger Vadim then, but so I can remember. And then later on in my life, I actually starred in a movie with her father, Henry Fonda. So it's this strange circle. My old roommates in Hollywood when I was a starving actor, with bad skin and living on coffee and French fries. I think our one great meal during the week was chicken and white wine, like that old Tom Waits song from the Coppola movie, One from the Heart. But, my roommates literally worked at the cinema bookstore, which you might be familiar with, Larry Edmonds, which is where I'm getting my star. And while they were eating their celery and carrots and a slice of pizza for lunch, they were working on a film. And that years later, that film that they were tossing around in their imagination and taking notes on in the store adjacent to where I'm getting my star. That film turned out to be The Lost Boys, the George Cukor film with
Wow,
Keith.
yeah.
So I have these extraordinary kind of connections. I lived in the hills right across the street from where I'm getting my star. I used to go to old cheap bargain matinee double bills, to catch up on my Hollywood history, see, two Sam Peckinpah movies in an afternoon for $1, uh, less than a pound. And I remember that. I remember, even sort of catching on to my horror zeitgeist back then, the Dr. Phibes movies with Vincent Price, and I think I saw all alone in a movie theater with maybe one wino in the back, dropping his bottle and hearing it roll down towards the screen. I think I saw a matinee early on there. I was doing research for a directing job. I think I saw a matinee of Hellraiser, the original,
Uh,
before it was dubbed with American
mm.
accents, when it still had the English accents of the original Clive Barker production with
Mm.
Doug Bradley, my mate, Doug Bradley. So the street means a lot to me.
Mm.
It does. On a personal level, even more than any kind of posterity or ego. I think it's just this strange connection to that wonderful old there's an expression, it's not politically correct anymore here in the States, but it was affectionate, you would call kind of an older sexy woman a broad. That she's a hell of a broad. It was always a compliment back in the kind of film noir 40s and early 50s, that she's a great old broad. And Hollywood Boulevard is a great old broad, you know.
Well, it's such an amazing, as you say, it's all connected. And, going back to, you mentioned West Side Story, seeing that on a big screen as a young man and having that effect on you, is it mad to think now that, people watch your movies? And for me, myself, I'm a huge fan of you and your work. You've done some amazing performances. But Freddy Krueger and those movies, Nightmare on Elm Street, is just, it affects people. People will walk out of your movies like you did with West Side Story and be affected by them just the same. They'll feel like they're in that movie.
My distance on it now allows me to realize I was able to enjoy it more because it happened to me in the 80s. 84 was the first film. That was 10 years into my career, and I'd probably done a dozen movies by then and starred in several of those movies with big stars from the 70s and big Hollywood stars, Henry Fonda, Susan Sarandon, Jeff Bridges, Sally Field, Barbara Streisand, Burt Reynolds, Charles Bronson. People forget how big like Charles Bronson or Jan Michael Vincent were back in the 70s, and I got to hit my marks alongside all of them and co-star with many of them. And so I sort of was able to kind of enjoy the ride with Freddie. It's just interesting to me to share with the fans now what it means to them. And the biggest thing I take away is that a great proportion of my fans experienced it at home
Mm,
on an old Sony color TV, on a video experience. And many times it was with their family.
mm.
And perhaps mom and dad had rented Pretty Woman at the local, mom and pop video store, and they let the kids go down the scary aisle, the horror aisle, you know, and pick a movie, and they have that great memory of sharing that experience of Nightmare on Elm Street and the surrealism of it and the nightmare and the dream landscape and the survivor girl. They shared that with a mom or a dad or an older brother or an older sister or a younger brother and younger sister or a stepfather or a cool stepdad that let them watch it when mom had banned it, from their view. I even did an episode of the American sitcom, The Goldbergs.
Mm.
I guest starred in an episode after I'd sort of put Freddie to rest because it was literally my agent's family's favorite show. And the plot was about him having to watch the movie next door, at his neighbor's house. And that, in fact, was true. It really had happened to the producer.
Mm.
And I get this feedback from so many people that a mom or a dad has passed away now.
Mm.
And yet they have this great memory of sitting in the semi-dark, of a living room somewhere in America, with that wonderful old comfy blanket over the back of the couch of the sofa, an old Afghan quilt or something, and some pizza rapidly growing cold on the coffee table, and a warm beer or a runny Coke with the ice melting, and watching their mom and dad get scared, or having dad sneak into the kitchen and tape steak knives to his hand, and tap on the window. I get this feedback, and I realize just
Mm.
how widespread it was. But this familial experience is one I never realized never really put together as a kind of contribution the films have made. I didn't really put that together until about 10 years ago, because I always think of it in terms of the theatrical release, and I would sneak in the back of movie theaters on the road or on location somewhere and watch an audience react to it, but one of the various sequels. But I never thought of it in those terms as Freddie being invited in, to the American household of the mid and 1980s through the mid 1990s, as this sort of videotaped guest, on a badly rewound blockbuster video.
Oh man, I miss those days of Blockbuster and all the local video places. You could just rent a film, and those were the days for movies, I think. But
Do they have in the UK? In some of the cities, have they begun this like the Renaissance with vinyl, records, there's been a renaissance now because there's so many things that you can't even find on the internet, but you can find them on video. So
Mm-hmm.
there are these sort of gourmet, hip, coffee serving video stores opening in LA. They're very wonderful, but they are stocked with great foreign films with uncut sequences and lesser known Roger Corman movies and things like that. And you can go check them out and watch them. And a lot of them have that very early kind of the making of,
Yeah.
sequence and tagged on to try to sell them. But they're doing quite well, just like the kind of Renaissance vinyl stores are doing well because people realize not only can you sometimes get better sound on an actual vinyl record, but in fact, they love the album art. The album art is so
Mm.
strong, and people are recognizing how great that was. David Bowie albums with some really terrific imagery on the front and back, and the liner notes. And I think there's a similar thing happening here with the videos being collected again.
100%. No, I've heard rumblings of certain things like there was a rumor that Blockbuster was coming back because there was such a resurgence in it, and there's definitely a few places in central London that do the VHS.
Yeah,
Um,
you get a great curator. Yeah, someone that's really curating and has taste. It's really fun because there are things you can't find. I mean, I'll do a deep dive down a rabbit hole on Tubi or something, because I think I've found something. And I find great, weird, strange things, but I know that some stuff you can just go to those video stores and they have it. A French, noir with Jean-Paul Belmondo or something, just boom, it's right there and you can check it out.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And we will go back to all of your movies and stuff. But I want to go like right to the beginning of your career when you kind of, let's say that you obviously went to see West Side Story, you were influenced by that. But what was the sort of impetus? Was there someone that kind of a mentor or a family member that was into film that kind of introduced you to that world? How did it start and how did you first go into the acting world and auditioning?
Well, the magic was revealed to me after I saw 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea with the giant squid and Kirk Douglas, and my mother had a crush on James Mason. And I mean, Peter Lorre's in that movie, and it won an Oscar. So shortly after that, I had a cousin whose father was a very busy professional film editor in Hollywood. And we got to go to Disneyland on the opening week. And in the original OG Disneyland, in Tomorrowland, they had the cut in half Nautilus, the actual set with the what we call wild walls in Hollywood, meaning you can take walls away so you can get the camera in there to shoot. And then you crop the frame so that you don't see so the camera shot doesn't leave the edge of the set. They had the Nautilus bisected and all the wardrobe of James Mason and Peter Lorre and Kirk Douglas, and the soundtrack playing in the background, and the props. And as you got to the inside of the Nautilus, they had that giant kaleidoscopic window that opened, and you looked out, and you literally looked under the sea with that dappled lighting coming down through some effect that they had done. This is at Disneyland now, 1955, I think. 56 maybe, at Disneyland, and they had the giant squid with the monofilament holding up the giant, arms with the beaks on the end of it and everything, the suckers on the end of the squid tentacles. And I love that because it revealed the magic behind the magic. So that's an influence. And then shortly after that, I discovered a series of pages in a coffee table book at my godfather's house. He was a big salesman for Simon and Schuster, the publishing house, probably the biggest distributor west of the Mississippi in America. And he had this coffee book, and I have it here, given to me by one of my makeup men behind me here. I think it's called The Movies. And there's a fold out page. It's a massive coffee table book. And it's all of the different makeups that the man of a thousand faces, Lon Chaney, did. in all of his various movies, not just Phantom of the Opera, which is the only one that was familiar to me, but all the others. In fact, he had taken an egg and boiled it and took the placentia, the skin off of the hard-boiled egg, and put it over his eye to make his eye look milky and blind in some, Zanzibar or some silent film that he'd done, the first contact lens, but he used it as an effect, a makeup effect. We all know the story about that's something that he put in his nostrils to expand his nostrils in Phantom of the Opera, but there was that one as well. And so those were real influential things. I remember every time I went to my godparents' home, whether they were babysitting for me or whether I was over there to go swimming in their swimming pool or my parents were just drinking martinis on the patio, I would go into this, bedroom that was floor to ceiling books and find that book, that coffee table book, and pore over the pictures. Great photo in there of Frankenstein and the little girl at the edge of the lake. Was a great photo in there of the daughters of Dracula. And this is pre-Hays Code, so you could kind of see beneath their sheer nightgowns, their nudity, and it was really kind of, triggering some really latent 8-year-old erotic, fever dream in me. But that was a significant, and all of this that I'm telling you, Elliot, are things I've realized in the last 20 years or so, these early influences. And then after that, my mother's best friend had a daughter a year older than I was, a wannabe actress, and she was devastatingly beautiful, just a beautiful, beautiful girl, dating older boys when she was 13 and 14 years old, dating boys with cars. And her mother was very nervous about this. And she went to a semi-professional children's theater, ages 13 to 19, and they sort of made me go along with her. Her mother asked my mother if I would also go along in this workshop, this drama workshop, and she sort of would have to chaperone me. I was sort of like a ball and chain around her leg, this beautiful 14-and-a-half-year-old girl, because they figured that would maybe slow her down because she was very adult, smoking cigarettes and everything. And so they sent me off, to sort of slow her down at this workshop. And I thought I was going to be, sweeping the stage and moving scenery and maybe an usher, with my little flashlight, combing my hair cool like James Dean. And they asked me to audition.
Oh, wow.
And I got all the leading roles. It's going to sound like an English panto now, but those are the roles I got. I was Aladdin and Peter Pan and Hansel and Gretel and Pinocchio. I think Pinocchio was my first starring role. Now I'm a kid. I'm 12 and a half or 13 years old. And all the other kids are like 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. And they have driver's licenses, and the girls have breasts and they're beautiful. And I have this memory of being in the girls' bathroom. And they had these things called spoolies, hair curlers, in my hair. They were curling my hair and then spraying it dark with this hair spray, because I was Pinocchio or Aladdin. I can't remember which one I was doing. They wanted me to have dark hair, so it was probably Aladdin, dark curly hair, And the girls were the harem girls from Aladdin.
Mm-hmm.
And they were all wearing those old-fashioned brassieres, which by today's standards are nothing. But back then, oh my God, they were smoking, and they were putting glitter on the brassieres for the harem girls in Aladdin. And they had an old portable record player on the floor echoing off the walls of the tiled girls' bathroom. And I think they were listening to the score of Gypsy. Sondheim again, Together was playing loudly, and they were teaching me how to blow smoke rings. And I remember the girls tightening my hair into these curlers and teaching me how to blow smoke rings. And they were deferring to me and even flirting with me because I was a star. I had the lead role. And I had like braziered boobs in each ear as the girl would lean over me to tighten a curler on me. And I remember thinking, because back then, no one said, when I grow up, I want to be an artist.
Mm.
I'm going to be a poet. I'm going to be a composer, a songwriter, an actor. It wasn't a cool thing. Back then in America, you had to be an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer. That's what you said, or you at least pretended you wanted to be that. And I knew then, I knew at that moment that I loved this. And then I got my first consistent laugh on stage, and that was during Pinocchio. And I'd hidden styrofoam in my Tyrolean vest and in the butt of my little Tyrolean shorts. And I was chased across the stage, left to right. And then I ran back, right to left. And I was being chased by American Indians with feathers and bows and arrows. That's not politically correct. Indigenous people, Native Americans. And the joke was that they can't kill Pinocchio because he's made of wood. He's a puppet. The arrows don't do any damage. And every time I did it, I put more arrows in my butt and more arrows in my hat and more arrows. And I had seen Some Like It Hot, the Billy Wilder film. And I remember Jack Lemmon dancing with Joey Brown, and he had the rose in his mouth, and he turned to the camera with the rose in his mouth, like that, and got a laugh. And I did that with an arrow and got a laugh. And I enhanced my laughs every night. And it was addictive. Now remember, arrows, right? This is the through line. The next school year, I was struggling in algebra in the back of the classroom. And it had just rained, which is rare in California. But the girls were all in the gymnasium. They were all outside doing archery practice, arrows, arrows. And I heard the sound of the arrows being shot into the hay bales, the haystacks with the targets on them. And the girls were sexy in their short shorts and their blouse with their collars popped up, a pre-80s collar up fashion look. And I remember looking at them and smelling the wet hay, and the smell of the wet hay and them shooting the arrows reminded me of my performance in Pinocchio. And it was such an oral, olfactory experience that it reminded me. I almost wept because I remembered how much fun I'd had in the theater that prior summer. And I knew at that moment in that class, this is middle school, junior high school, probably the eighth grade, ninth grade, possibly. I knew that was what I was going to do the rest of my life. And so it's strange things. It's a smell, it's a memory, it's older girls, it's the power I had as an actor, it's the comedy. That like being a rock star, getting that laugh is like, it's what keeps stand-up comics going back to that microphone every night, even after they bomb, to get it right, to get it perfect, to build it the way you want it. And it was just sort of like all those things combined. But I was small for my age. I hadn't hit my growth spurt yet. And this was really a confidence builder.
Mm.
Because I was playing leading roles and getting that power respect. And then on top of that, that kind of latent sexuality of actresses and girls and backstage and teenage girls smoking cigarettes in costumes and makeup and being close, that proximity was very erotic and wonderful as a teenage boy. And I'd love to talk about art and poetry and writing and directing and all those things engaging me. But it was all that other sensual stuff that originally hooked me into it. But that's when I knew, and I was quite young. I couldn't have been a day over 14. I knew I was going to do it for the rest of my life.
Wow. And you have. I mean, you've
Yeah.
smashed it. That must be a bit wild to look back at that moment and think, well, here I am now getting my star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And
And at that moment, when I was 14, that even then I knew Hollywood Boulevard,
yeah.
because I would go see premieres with my mother and father, and there were nice restaurants near there where we would go eat sometimes, and I'd have to wear my suit and my dress shoes, my Sunday suit and my best shoes and polish them. But so that was all mixed up. It's all in a kind of stew, a goulash that all contributed simultaneously. But yeah, and it's so funny, the star on Hollywood Boulevard. The more I think about it, because I'm getting asked these questions now, I can think of every time I think of like places where when I was really broke and didn't have money, where I could go get a special bargain breakfast even on Hollywood Boulevard, and I remember, the ups and downs of Hollywood Boulevard. I remember when it was fancy as a child, and then even into the middle 60s, and then it's had its ups and downs, and it's being gentrified again now. But I can remember, so many. I remember even the punk rock time on Hollywood Boulevard, and Hollywood Boulevard adjacent. It really informs a lot of my life. And to get my little piece of cement there with my name, I only regret that my father's not there to see the family name, permanently in cement with a piece of bubble gum stuck to it.
It's amazing, really. It is amazing. And oh, man, the that's such an amazing thing. You've got such a clear memory of that moment. The fact that you remember the smell and all those emotions. What was the step into, going, right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to, I guess, get an agent, or what was the kind of, getting that first audition? What was the process there and getting the first job?
Well, I'd had encouragement from directors and the famous talk show host Steve Allen, and I'd exhausted almost I actually literally exhausted every theater course in high school. And then I'd done just mountains of acting in college, beginning directing scenes, advanced directing scenes, graduate student directing scenes, main stage plays. And by the time the summer of 1966 rolled around, my friends and I actually had our own theater in Hollywood.
Wow.
Yeah. We had our own theater in Hollywood, getting reviews in Variety and the Hollywood Reporter and the Los Angeles Times and the Herald Examiner. Yeah. So we had our own theater. And so I was snowballing to that. I was doing so poorly academically in college because I was so busy acting, I'd neglected the rest of my work, that as a fail-safe, I auditioned for the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. I got the audition in New York, I think through the TCG Theater Communications Group. And I was accepted, and I went over to look for, a place to stay in London. And gosh, I can never remember her last name. This wonderful woman, Sybil. She was assistant to John Fernald at the Royal Academy. And she gave me the terrible news that RADA was not a draft exempt college, university, place of higher learning or study. So it wouldn't keep my little sorry ass out of Vietnam. So I came back to the States, and I didn't know what I was going to do now. And I'd sort of fallen in love again with my high school sweetheart. And my friend, one of my classmates, roommate actually, told me that the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art was in fact moving a branch to America, to the United States, and it was bringing over its creme de la creme of the faculty. And I auditioned again up in San Francisco, and I got in, and one or two of my mates did too. And I married my high school sweetheart, and I got in a car and I drove across America, and I showed up in a suburb of Detroit, Rochester, Michigan, with this wonderful old university and the Matilda Wilson Dodge estate, which is now used for all the Antiques Roadshow traveling shows. But it's just this unbelievable faux English estate, English country estate on these rolling hills, the largest indoor riding rink in the world at that time, and a screening room with tiles on the in the fireplace in the screening room of Charlie Chaplin and Lillian Gish and all of the silent stars had come there as guests to screen movies. That's how powerful and wealthy she was. This is Matilda Wilson Dodge, as in Dodge cars. It's like saying, in America, that's like saying Ford or Chevrolet or Cadillac or Mercedes. And and so I went to work, and my all my tutors, all my coaches were English. My voice teacher was the voice of was the guy that did the Blue Meanie in the Yellow Submarine, you know. And I had all the, and then one of my tutors had just done Chimes of Midnight for Orson Welles with Keith Baxter over in the UK. And and just all these extraordinary people. John Broome, who was the choreographer, Stop the World, I Want to Get Off with Anthony Newley and Millicent Martin. And Millicent Martin later became a co-star of mine on television before she was on Frasier. But so it's that thing. But I went there, and I was a by the time I got out of there, I was a dyed in the wool Anglophile. You know, I went in, you know, skulking around like James Dean, and by the time I left, I wanted to be Tom Courtenay or Alan Bates or Albert Finney or Peter O'Toole. Those were my idols. But that was by the time I got through there, I was ready to go, and I was already auditioning in New York. I think my first trip to New York would have been 67. No, 68. End of 68. And my very first audition, I nailed it, you know. So I was already getting offers, you know, to work. I had to finish my training, but I had a summer stock job, you know, a summer theater job. And I started working then, and I just kept working ever since. So I've been working professionally since the end of 1968.
Wow. Yeah, well, I noticed that your credits I mean, you're pushing 400 credits, and that's just on IMDb. So there's probably more that aren't on there.
Well, it's funny. I keep remembering things. I just remember these strange things that you forget, you know. And oh my God, yeah, I did a Walker Texas Ranger, and Chuck had to yank me off a helicopter, and why did I do that? What was I thinking? Hanging onto a helicopter, you know, and you remember all these weird, you know, because I would star in a movie, but then I would be bad guy number one or bad guy number two or bad guy number three. And you don't have lines unless you're bad guy number one, you know. I think I was bad guy number two on in a Charles Bronson movie. And then I think I was bad guy number two on a Burt Reynolds movie. And then I did Police Story and Chips and Charlie's Angels and Police Woman. I probably did Police Dog back then. But, you know, sometimes, you know, I was the guest star, and then sometimes I just had to, you know, try to stand behind somebody and get my face on the screen as bad guy number three, you know. But you learn from all of those. And sometimes you work with remarkable people on those shows. I remember doing, I think it was the Police Story. I was a bank robber and then a stoolie, a squealer. And I got to work with, Robert Culp, and I got to work with Dennis Weaver, but also I worked with that wonderful guy from Hill Street Blues, you know, and he told me all about what it was like to work in New York in the 1950s. People would sometimes jump in a cab and share cab fare and do 2 or 3 small parts on live television every day. And you can imagine, like, catching a cab at 8 in the morning and taping at 10 and going to lunch and catching a cab and taping a show at 2 and, you know, having a beer and catching a cab and going across town and doing a Playhouse 90 with James Dean at 8 o'clock at night, you know, live taping. What was that like, you know? And then a lot of them, you know, would do that in the daytime and then go do a Broadway play by Tennessee Williams at night with Paul Newman in it or something. I mean, what was that? I've read the Alec Guinness autobiographies and others about what it was like, post-war London, the great theater scene, and they all lived in Soho,
Yeah,
every, go to the play, go to lunch, go to dinner, do a play, do a movie, it just must have been this intoxicating, wonderful moment of time.
Oh, it feels like that, doesn't it? You hear these stories and you think that
Yeah.
sounds like a movie. It doesn't sound like real life. Yeah, and
And
amazing.
nobody was, flabbergastingly rich at the time,
Mm,
but you were always working and you always had money, and you had, money for a nice meal, because that was you broke bread during the middle of the day and then was off to do something else. But, we also forget that things weren't expensive back then in those years. In the 50s, New York and London were very affordable. And if you had a roommate, like, you've heard the story about Gene Hackman and Dustin Hoffman and Robert Duvall, and those guys were all roommates together,
mm,
and
crazy.
so they could afford a good suit and taxis, and a fancy meal once a week, but again, the rent wasn't much, in those days. They had what they called the cold water flat, which I'm sure, you've heard about. Yeah. No
Yeah,
hot water.
it's changed a bit now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I literally in the 70s, early 70s, late 60s, my first time in New York, in the kitchen,
Mm.
there was the bathtub. And there were guys from the Village Voice, the famous newspaper. They advertised the Village Voice, and they would come and do a custom top to the bath in the kitchen because all the plumbing was in one area.
Oh
And
wow.
that became your kitchen table. So we had this great plywood top on it that would hinge up. And then you'd fill it with hot water and take your bath after you did the dishes. That was, that's what I think they were called dumbbell apartments.
Yeah, yeah.
You looked
Wow.
on it, it looked like, yeah, two rooms and then a narrow hall linking them.
That is crazy.
Now for a quick break. We'll be back to the episode shortly. If you enjoyed this episode and want to support us, get early access and exclusive content and episodes, click to join our YouTube channel and become a member now. Please leave us a positive rating. Add us on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok at Life in Film Pod. Essentially, please like and subscribe everything. It makes a huge difference. Thank you. Life in Film has partnered with Betterhelp to provide you with access to the largest online therapy service in the world. And it can all be done from the comfort of your own home, from a phone, tablet or laptop. No commute, cutting down travel costs, and most importantly, it's affordable. With over 1,000 therapists in the UK, Betterhelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a wide variety of expertise in mental health. If you need someone to talk to and you're thinking of giving therapy a go, BetterHelp is a great option. And being a listener of the podcast, you get 10% off. That's 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lifeinfilm. That's betterhelp.com/lifeinfilm. We are sponsored by movieposters.com. Are you a movie fan? I presume you are. Well, at movieposters.com, you can shop for all your favourite posters in one place. The #1 source for high quality, authentic movie posters. From new releases to cult classics and 100% authentic originals. Thinking of having a browse? Well, if you see a poster that tickles your fancy, as a listener of the podcast, you get 10% off. That's 10% off with promo code LifeInFilm10. That's promo code LifeInFilm10. So why not give it a go? And back to the show.
It's very evident that you did mention that you had loads of roles before, playing the iconic Freddy Krueger. But when you did get that role, did you immediately? I mean, it's such an iconic image now with the jumper and the hat and the hand and all that. Was it ever a different look? Was it always going to be that? Did you work on that look and did you know that it was going to be, what it became?
It was always that on the page.
Mm.
Wes had conjured this, and I think it could have. I mean, the jumper could have become a cardigan, but it wasn't. The hat could have been altered, but it wasn't. But Wes had always had this image of a vagrant, We used to say hobo or bum. You're not allowed to say that anymore. I don't want to say homeless person, but a vagrant on the street outside his family home who had caught Wes peering at him from the upstairs window. And I think he wore a fedora.
Mm.
And I think he had grime on his face, soot on his face. Not that he was burned. And Wes, that evolved into the burn. But at one point, just hours before we, not out, yeah, literally hours or a day before we began to shoot, both Wes Craven and the producer Robert Shea were nervous about the makeup and how it would light, how the cameraman and the gaffer would light it, what it would look like. And we'd done lots of tests, and for some reason, they lost faith in the fedora. I think they were just panicked by a lot of things, and they were putting me in these different hats. They brought a box over from the famous Western costume, and I remember they literally tossed me a Paperboy's hat, a Peaky Blinders cap. You know, I look like a refugee from the chorus line of Newsies or something. That musical. Extra, extra, read all about it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna dance. I'm gonna sing. I'm gonna do my thing. No, just like it. I knew it was wrong. Oh, please God, no. And I remember fighting for the fedora. And I said, you guys, I love the fedora because for me, it's triggered a memory of the old paperback book of The Shadow. Who knows what lurks in the hearts of men? The shadow knows. And so I knew about that book cover, and I realized the value of the fedora in hiding my eyes so that I could look up and reveal them, and of covering the bald, deformed burn scars on my head, and that I could remove the hat at some point and really get an effect out of revealing, what had happened to Freddie. And I kept telling them that, and then I think there was a lamp in the room we were in. Wes and Bob were sitting on an old futon on the ground with cigarette burns on it, and I took the shade off the lamp and I put it on the other side of the room so that it would cast a shadow of me in the hat on the wall. And I said, look at the value of the silhouette with the hat. And I got my way. I won the fight. But it was Wes's idea from the get-go. I mean, that's what Wes originally wanted. He was just losing faith in it. And so I fought for the fedora, which I think is really a significant win. And then, all the rest of the stuff was what they wanted. They originally had, the pants were originally very greasy and shiny, which drove me nuts because the oil would seep through and get on my underwear and on my legs, and my legs were breaking out.
Wow.
And so I said, this isn't even going to show, on screen. You rarely even see feet on screen, let alone, they're black pants. No one's going to see it. So let's just wear wrinkled, dirty, dusty, old black, slacks. And so I sort of saved myself a lot of aggravation from the oily pants. But that was about it. The rest of it is all written down. And things could have come out differently. There could have been a cardigan. The glove could have looked differently. The hand could have looked differently. But I do remember in the first week also, the original glove was heavy. And I just dropped one shoulder every day, because of the weight of the glove. And also, I didn't want to poke myself. I couldn't put my hand in my pocket with that thing on. And I caught myself in one of the wardrobe mirrors one day backstage with my shoulder dropped a little bit. And I said, what does that remind me of? And then I realized I look like a gunfighter in an old Western, before he draws the gun.
Yeah.
And so that's just a weird way actors work. So that image of the gunfighter in the dusty street with a camera shot between his legs, and then you see the other gunfighter down the street and he's got one shoulder dipped down lower than the other and he pulls out the gun. I just sort of embraced that a little bit. I just sort of filed that like a little computer chip in my brain. And the moment when I got all my wardrobe on and I finally got done with that long makeup session and put the glove on, strapped on the glove, I would, go on the set And I had that image in my head, and I would just drop into that position, and I exaggerated it just a little bit. And that's sort of where I found his posture and physicality. I'd like to say it was some internal thing, but I also knew that Freddy does not exist on a reality plane. He is in a subconscious plane. He is in a dream landscape. He's surreal and in a fantasy imagined world of the person who's dreaming him, who's having the nightmare. And oftentimes around him is a kind of surreal, especially in terms of lighting, but also in terms of just the exaggerated scenery or the camera angle, or the size of doors or the lowness of ceilings, slightly exaggerated and not real. And I could paint myself into that frame, a bit like a dancer. And those are just weird choices, that you make as an actor. They're not psychological so much as they're stylistic sometimes. But you see that mistake a lot. You see a comedy, a broad comedy, or you'll see a drawing room comedy, or you'll see a sophisticated comedy, or you'll see an out and out farce. All those things are very different and distinct. You have to all be on the same page. And it's true of horror too, and kinds of horror and melodrama. And so I realized I had this excuse, because I was in this sort of surreal nightmare landscape, dreamscape. That's where Freddy occupies. He's not walking around the corner with having a cigarette. He's actually in your imagination. He's polluting your imagination and toying with your fears.
Yeah, it's such an incredible concept, such a brilliant character, and it's mental to think now that it was ever any discussion over the hat or the look, or because it is so iconic now. It's kind of mad.
I have to forgive Wes and Bob because I think it was just last minute panic, that hit them.
That's incredible, man. And to that, I mean, we're really running out of time now, and I just want to ask a couple of really quick fire questions.
I've actually got a nice break, Elliot. So if you have more questions, go ahead.
Oh, thanks, man. It's just a few little bits, but it's just our audience had a few questions for you. First one is Sanj, and he asked that when Freddy versus Jason came about, obviously that was a huge, that was something that people really wanted, and it was of huge cultural relevance at the time. Was there any trepidation on actually bringing that to life?
I think the trepidation would have been from the fans. Some of the fans thought that was sort of violating the purity of both of those particular franchises. Here's my story about why I know that's not true, why I know that New Line and other people involved, Sean Cunningham, etc., why they weren't just exploiting the two franchises. Back in the 1930s, adolescent boys would sit on the stoop, on the stairs in front of their apartment buildings in New York and Chicago and Detroit and San Francisco and London. And they would wonder, out of curiosity, if there was a fight between Frankenstein and the Wolfman, who would win? Mate, who would win? And they would wonder what would happen, if Superman and Batman threw down. And those were made into projects. They were made into comic books, into movies. And this is the late 1930s, early 1940s. And so none of this was conjured by the studio. This was a direct response to a fan curiosity. When I did the original Nightmare, which was 1984, I was still starring in a hit television show called Visitors, science fiction. Big miniseries, big deal. And the first time people had ever put my name to my face. And I was preoccupied with that. And at the end of the miniseries, I was invited by NBC, the big network, to be the kind of celebrity at a big Thanksgiving, our big holiday before Christmas, a Thanksgiving Day parade up in Sacramento, the capital of California. Beautiful, mid-California, inland area. And I went up and I had my little bow tie on and my bad '80s perm, and I sat in the back of a car, and I waved to everybody, and we were the number one show in America then. And I came to the end of it, and my wife and I, or my girlfriend and I, were planning on going into the wine country, which is adjacent to Sacramento, for Thanksgiving. Oh, the wine country, and have some gourmet food, and this is what we'll do, and I've got money in my pocket now, and I can't wait. And I got off the float, and I ripped off my little stupid Willie, the good alien bow tie, and ruffled my hair, and a motorcycle pulled up, and it was like a Hell's Angel, but a really good looking guy, acne scars on his cheekbones and long, thick, greasy blonde hair, and muscles. And he got off his Harley Davidson, and he goes, "Mr. England, look." And he took his pants down to his knees, and he took off his vest, his denim vest, and from his elbows to his knees, his complete torso was a Japanese gangster Yakuza anime illustration of Freddy and Jason wrestling like sumo wrestlers. It wrapped all around him, taking advantage of his own musculature in his armpits, all the way down to his knees, on the back of his thighs, down to his crack on his back. And this is November of 1984.
Wow.
November of 1984, a Hell's Angel already had a full torso Freddy versus Jason tattoo. So that was the drumbeat. That was, for me, the beginning of this fascination of the Freddy versus Jason thing. And then years later, I was in France, Gérard de Mer, and I was with Johnny Halliday, the French Elvis, and Asia Argento, and a bunch of wonderful English and British actors. And we were all snowed in this beautiful town on the border of France and Germany, France and Switzerland, and eating magnificent, hearty, rustic, provincial French food, and watching movies all day. John Landis was there, and it was just this wonderful thing. We were all on the jury. And, I remember that at some point there, the entire town had decorated the windows with of the little shops and everything with Freddy Krueger cakes and Freddy Krueger croissants and things like that. And I was thinking, wow, this is huge. And then I saw this movie with John Landis at 9 in the morning with my big cup of French coffee. And that, 9 in the morning, I'm not always in the mood for a horror comedy, but it was Bride of Chucky, directed by Ronnie Yu. And he won. We gave him an award, a special award. We loved it so much because he woke us up. It got us through the day. We were so enchanted by the performance of Jennifer Tilly, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful thing, a hybrid horror comedy,
Yeah,
Chucky.
right.
And we gave an award to Ronnie Yu, and Ronnie Yu turned out to be the right guy to direct Freddy versus Jason. And if you watch Freddy versus Jason, it really holds up. But if you watch it on the new ultra sonic 4K, high def, it just looks great. But Ronnie had this great kind of, it's almost like turning the pages of a graphic novel. It's like a wonder you sort of surrender to this kind of advanced cinematic storyboarding when you watch it. And it's one of the best, previously on Nightmare on Elm Street. It's got that great opening that really brings you up to date if you haven't seen it before. And it has its share of humor in it, and dark humor, the correct humor, the right kind of humor. And it has a survivor girl, which it needs, Monica, the lovely Monica Keena. But he should get a lot of credit for that. The degree of difficulty on bringing that to the big screen, and it was a huge, huge success. But Ronnie Yu, is if you look at Bride of Chucky, a double bill of Bride of Chucky and Freddy versus Jason, these are two terrific, wonderful, fun genre films.
Yeah, both brilliant. I remember going to see Freddy vs. Jason in the cinema, and it was just like a really pivotal and memorable experience in the cinema with that the audience interacting, and that doesn't happen in England.
You know, when you look at Deadpool or Guardians of the Galaxy, you know, we needed those movies like we needed Freddy versus Jason.
Mm,
So we don't take ourselves so seriously, but also because the fans get to that point
mm.
where they know more about what we're going to do than we do. And they can catch us a lot. And that's what Wes did with the new Nightmare, Wes Craven, is he knew that the fans knew what we know. And so we were saying, we know that you know what we know, but we're still going to scare you and entertain you. And
Such
that's a
good
hybrid
film.
that had to be achieved, I think, in horror
Mm.
and perhaps science fiction too. There's that great new wonderful thing that they're doing on Black Mirror, you know, with Star Trek.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah.
just magnificent. And there has to be room for that. And you know, and both Deadpool and Guardians of the Galaxy allowed us to laugh with and at some of the stuff we're doing. There's a great a monologue by Bill Maher, the American comedian and talk show host, where he hits a threshold, you know, with big superhero movies, and he kind of abbreviates the entire genre into one word: the quest for the glowing thing, you know, and how that gets a little silly, and how that effect is getting a little silly now.
Yeah.
The glowy thing. And I've worked with glowy things, so I know what he's talking about. But it's true. It had to be refreshed. It needed to be refreshed, which is why I right now I'm such an addict of the Noah Hawley Alien Earth.
Oh yeah, I'm halfway through that at the moment. It's great.
Oh boy, is it good! It just gets and that there's a wonderful actor on there, and I'm going to forget his name now. I had it memorized.
Is it the English guy?
It's the cyborg, the actor playing the cyborg.
Oh,
Yeah.
Timothy. No, not Timothy Oliphant. He's playing the.
Well, he's
He's
a
brilliant.
replicant. He's doing
Yeah, 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 yeah.
he's doing an homage to Rutger Hauer.
Yes, yeah. No, the black guy.
Yeah, the black guy. Yeah.
I can't remember his name, but he's great.
He's great. He's just captivating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a brilliant show. Robert, we've got to wrap up now, but thank you so much, and I really
right.
appreciate this, and I'm a huge fan. So this is a big deal for me, and it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Elliot. Bye bye.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode and you want to support us, get early access and exclusive content, all ad-free, click and join the Life in Film YouTube channel and become a member now. Thank you to our guest Robert, and thank you to Elizabeth and the team at East to West Collective. As always, thank you to our sponsors, movieposters.com and Betterhelp.